broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Houston, Texas. It's time for Houston Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Hello, Houston. Trisha Stutzel here, bringing you another episode of Houston Business Radio. It is my pleasure to introduce you to my guest today, Robert McKnight, client executive with INSURICA in Phoenix, where he specializes in commercial real estate and construction risk insurance. An Arizona native and University of Arizona grad, Rob has spent nearly a decade in the commercial insurance industry, earning experience with global firms like Marsh and Willis before joining INSURICA, where he's known for his relationship-driven approach and sharp understanding of sales psychology. Yes, we're going to talk more about that. Outside of the office, Robert is deeply committed to his community. He spent 5 years with the Scottsdale Saguaros, helping raise over $1 million a year for local children's charities. And today he serves on the board of Save the Family, supporting families on their path out of homelessness. He's a husband, a dad, and a believer in giving back to the place he calls home. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Trisha.
Super excited about our conversation today. But before we dive into any technical work stuff, tell us more about Robert.
Yeah, well, you hit it pretty good. I feel like I should hire you to kind of do my intro and meetings, quite frankly. But yeah, so a husband to a beautiful wife that I don't deserve, but I'm not giving her back. 2 crazy children and a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old boy. And then, Monday through Friday, you can hear me talking to real estate owners about the crazy world of commercial insurance and what's new and what's not new. And then in my free time, I like to stay active and fit. And then also, I know we'll get into it at some point, talk about giving back to the community, which I now do through Save the Family. So a lot of great things to help families in Maricopa County, which is the county we live in here in Phoenix, overcome homelessness and poverty and reach for self-sufficiency. So
that's beautiful. Thank you for giving back. It's so important. I have a motto. It's not well written, but if I go out into the community and I expect people to buy from me, then I should be giving back to that same community, right? It sounds like we share that in common.
Yeah, no, it's so true. So true.
Yeah,
it's even one thing I've only been on the board with Save the Family since January of this year. But even one thing I've talked to the leadership team and, because it's constantly looking for different ways to funnel income. Because as a board member, right, I don't get paid for that. That's all, quasi volunteer. I'm happy to do that. Just like my time with the Scottsdale Saguaros, all volunteer. But it's funny because, we have clients, for instance, and I actually have an event tomorrow, even though we're seeing a ton of rain in Phoenix. So we'll see how it goes. But, when they became a client of our agency, they're like, hey, just letting you know, part of a requirement for all of our vendors, including our insurance brokers, is that you buy a foursome to our golf tournament every year. And it's like,
nice.
It's like, okay, so we know that going in. And so one thing I really push back on with Save the Family is like, we've got to get that same methodology going on with all of our vendors. Like they own and manage, over 170 rental units. So in Arizona, just like in Houston, HVAC is a big thing, especially in the summertime. So it's like all those people coming out to service your units and whatnot, or restoration services. It's like you're giving them thousands of dollars, or you're buying new cars every year. You're giving dealerships thousands of dollars. It's okay to go to those vendors and ask for some money back to your organization. So it's like a quid pro quo.
It is, absolutely. And, we're all there for the same reason, which is to serve the community. In some cases, not asking for money because we're volunteering, but in other cases, using vendors who also need to get paid, right? We understand that. We all want to be profitable, whatever profitable means to you. It doesn't always have to be monetary. And having those partnerships is truly important. And there are vendors out there who want to play that game, right? And be a part of something bigger than just themselves. I love that. I'd like to circle back, if it's okay to talk about work for a minute. When I introduced you, I said something about sales psychology and even building rapport with anyone. What does that actually look like? I know you're in the insurance business. You have to go talk to people all the time.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that sales psychology and building rapport with anyone.
Yeah, so I think, and it's from our kind of previous conversation, which I think you and I really intertwined with well, which is a lot of times, and as you're mentioning, whether it's virtually like this, since, you know, the 2020 days of COVID, when it used to be kind of all in person before then. I remember, you know, hopping on my first virtual meeting and the camera turned on and I saw my face and it freaked me out. And now, like, look how far we've come in 5 years, because it used to be all in person, right? This used to not really be a thing. But it's funny because I'm meeting with a ton of people, but for the most part, when you're having that first meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, it's a complete stranger a lot of the times, right? You don't know them from Adam, and that's totally okay. And that's how business gets done a lot of the times. But salespeople in general, and myself included, because no one's perfect, we're all still like on a path to getting better, right? Are terrible at, to a certain extent, of talking about themselves way too much, talking about their product and offering, and not taking the appropriate amount of time to get to know the person that they're talking to. And so the one thing that we spoke about that I think rings so true, and when I first heard it, I was like, man, I am so bad at that, and I'm working every day to get better, is the one-upping method. And one-upmanship is a lot of times what it's called. And so when you're sitting across from a buyer or a decision maker, and you see a placard on their wall or a picture with, you know, a bunch of boys, and it's their sons and their wife maybe, and it's like, oh, what was that, Joe? And it's like, oh, well, I was just in Cabo last week, you know, doing like deep sea fishing with my family. And before they could even finish their sentence, the salesperson's like, oh my gosh, I was just in Cabo for my bachelor party 2 weeks ago, and we did this. And you're completely ruining a chance to do like a deep dive and get more into their story and learn more about their why behind that story, and their why behind their family, and how they came to have a family, and their sons' names, and so many more things that you can identify about them and their story that can help you just build rapport, that take it from a stranger to someone to having somewhat of a relationship by the time that meeting's over. So that's one thing I really, really try to do is much as I can resist talking about myself, and then starting questions with what and how, which is usually going to lead to an open-ended question. It's not going to lead to a yes or no answer. And making sure that if there's a 60-minute meeting on the books, I'm trying to talk maybe 15 minutes of it and have them talking for 45 minutes of it, regardless if we're hitting on insurance. Because, you know, in our business, the sales cycle can sometimes be, you know, 18 months to 3 years, because it's a business to business, and it's usually a multi-million-dollar decision that they're making annually. So they're not going to move at the drop of a hat, right? And so it's 3-4 meetings, sometimes stretched over a year or year and a half before you're even making solid movement on an opportunity. So building rapport is nothing to glance over in my mind. So
yeah, absolutely. It's so important, this relationship building. I think you used the same example in the conversation that we had before.
Yeah.
And I said, tell me more, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to resist, I think, because we want to have that connection with someone. So we want to say, hey, you and I, we're similar. Let's have this conversation instead of really digging into what's important to them. I love that. Such great advice on knowing what those triggers are and saying, okay, be quiet, and open it, and using those open-ended questions, and starting your questions with those who, what, when, where, why, how. So important. Yeah. Absolutely. So how do you balance then? You talked about having several conversations, and building rapport is huge. It's huge in my business and in your business. Yeah. How do you balance that building rapport, being personable, with also being prepared when you're sitting down with someone to talk about your product?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So building rapport, I think, comes from the meeting and doing some research on the individual that you're sitting down with, right? Like very, very similar to this, having like a prep call even internally with your team to find out as much as you can about the organization or the individual you're meeting with. And then, you know, my thing with people taking meetings with insurance professionals is, one, you know, we're helping guide them towards a necessity. People have to buy insurance. A lot of people think of it as kind of a necessary evil. Unfortunately, I don't see it as that. But I guess where I'm going with that is, anyone that takes a meeting with you, knowing that they currently have a broker in place, I think is feeling some sort of pain. Now, where they are on the pain scale is like on a 1 to 10. It's very similar to going to the doctor's office. Like, are you a 3? Are you a 6? Are you a 9? Which is like excruciating pain, right? So, but still a firm believer that pain has to override the fear of change in order for change to occur, right? So it's understanding the premium they're paying, the losses that they've suffered maybe over like a 5-year period. And then I know another thing that we were probably going to talk about, so I apologize for potentially jumping ahead, but is owning the idea, because of what's going on in commercial insurance is there's really kind of been a bit of an infusion, specifically in property insurance and as it relates to commercial real estate, an infusion of capital into the reinsurance market, which is reinsurance is actually insurance for insurance carriers. Because the property insurance market, as far as losses go, the losses haven't really like dissipated at all. And so what it tells me is there's a huge infusion of capital coming in, right? And basically watering down the losses, and people are getting double-digit rate decreases currently on their property insurance. But at the end of the day, Tricia, if you pay Travelers, like the Red Umbrella, it's a household name, that's why I bring up that company. If you pay them $1 million a year in insurance, and you have a goose egg of losses at the end of the year, Travelers is going to give you like a nice pat on the back, maybe a hug from your underwriter, and they're going to go on their merry way. You're not getting $1 of that back. Right. And so where I've been successful and where I've had a lot of changing the conversation with my insureds and clients is showing them an alternative risk transfer, a captive, self-insurance on training wheels, showing clients that based off of how they've performed over the last 5 years, if they were in a model that I brought to them, a self-insurance on training wheels model, because there's still a stop loss in place. If a loss ever got too bad, there's a carrier to come in and grab the bag, if you will. They can get up to 30 to 50% of their premium back in some cases as a dividend back to their organization. So, and you're talking about real money. It's not an if, it's a when. It's like when your losses perform like they performed in the past, you can get up to 50% of your premium back. So it's a conversation that's captivating to a lot of insureds, a lot of clients. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little window dressing. People are like, oh, it's too good to be true. There is some risk involved, like there is in any program like that where there's an offering like that. But it's certainly great conversations to have. So.
Wow. So I'm learning so many things. I didn't know there was insurance for insurance. So thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like that's a big differentiator for you and working under the or with INSURICA. What are other reasons why? So that's a fantastic program, and I love that. What are some other differentiators besides you, Robert, because you love building rapport, and I think that the human behind the name is so important. But what other differentiators does INSURICA have from other companies that people might be using or thinking about using right now?
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because there are, working at two of the largest publicly traded firms in Marsh and Willis. If you look at like the rankings, and there's a ton of mergers and acquisitions within the insurance space, but Marsh, I think, is still number 1, and Willis is probably top 5. Companies like that, and I'm not a big fan of blackballing my competition, so I'm going to keep it very light, but companies like that are a big fan of data and analytics and the power of the data and the analytics. And I'm telling you, from working at both of those companies, I've seen the data and analytics fall flat on their face in front of clients, and so there isn't a lot of solutions to be had there. So what I like about INSURICA is it's all about client first principles, sitting down, meeting with your client, listening to your client, understanding their risks through what we call a risk assessment, which is, once again, asking a bunch of open-ended questions and basically scoring them throughout that questionnaire, usually doing it with a colleague. So there's a second set of ears and eyes and understanding the client's reaction. And then coming to them with a plan based off of those questions answered, with basically whether it's for their workers' comp, whether it's for their property. Sometimes there's large fleets involved with 18-wheelers driving across the country on a daily basis and a bunch of DOT regulations and whatnot. So I think INSURICA holds themselves to a standard of sometimes salespeople can get a bad rap. And to a certain extent, what I love about INSURICA is we're a bunch of salespeople that do what we say we're going to do, which is a lot less common than people think it is, quite frankly. And then another thing personally for me, how I kind of build my brand outside of, being a busy dad and a lot of activities outside the office, is my best ability is my availability, right? Is when your clients, I joke with my in-laws actually quite a bit, when they'll be visiting for a holiday or something like that, and they'll say, hey, Rob, what's your week look like? And I say, well, hey, here's all the meetings I have on my calendar currently. And I go, but Joe wasn't planning on his truck getting on the crash on Monday, or the ABC worker falling off a ladder, or this person certainly wasn't planning on their building catching on fire on a Thursday. So it's like there's everything you have planned for the week, and then there's all the stuff that pop up in the world of insurance, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I know people are already interested in having a conversation with you, Robert. What's the best way for folks to connect with you?
Yeah, so best way is through my direct line, which is 480-881-6236. And then my email, which is robert.mcknight@INSURICA, INSURICA.com.
Perfect. Thank you. As you guys know, I'll put that in the show notes. You can find Robert's phone number and his email address. If you're sitting in front of your computer, you can just point and click to get in touch with him. All right, Robert, you've been in commercial insurance for nearly a decade. So, two-part question. What's changed the most and what hasn't changed at all?
What's changed the most and what hasn't changed at all? So I would say, once again, getting into the alternative risk transfers and the captive insurance. I think that's changed the most. That's evolved the most. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, the biggest wedge, you might want to call it, when you're meeting with an insured on creating an opportunity for yourself, is when you're going out and meeting with an insured or a potential new client, and you tell them about a brand new idea, and it's the first time they're hearing about the idea. And then a constant question you're going to get after a presentation like that is like, wow, that's really interesting, Robert. How long has that existed for? And you tell them that it's existed for 10 or 15 or 20 plus years. And it's like, whoa, I've had a broker for 15 or 20 plus years that does exactly what you do. And I've never heard of anything that you're talking about. So it starts to create a little bit of doubt and a little bit of pain. Like I said, that's like, I don't know what I don't know, to a certain extent, if I'm the client at that moment. And so it's creating a wedge for me, which is great. What hasn't changed, and quite frankly, is like the worst ones that we see on times like that I just described, is the 30-year very stale relationship, and the constant of blocking other brokers. And I get it. Relationships are very important. It's not a good thing to hire a broker and then change brokers every 2 to 3 years. That's not it. But having said that, having a broker relationship and something as serious as insurance, which is responsible for protecting the company after a loss and pre-loss, quite frankly, based off of fishing trips and trips to the casino, also isn't it. So giving you a perfect example of it, of a potential client, obviously going to keep their name out of this, but that we're going through this process with currently. We missed out on getting their insurance a couple of years ago. And I talked to their CFO a couple months ago, and they had their renewal in August. And during their renewal in August, they barely talked about their cyber insurance policy at all. Mm. And last month I touched base with her, and she wants to meet in the middle of December to talk about potentially making a switch. But basically what happened a month ago was they had an uncovered cyber loss for about $900,000. And it was because they were underinsured in that specific cyber category. And so my point being is, it's a 30-year relationship where the renewal meetings have turned into like, hey, Linda, hey, Joe. It's like, how are your kids doing? How's everything going? And it's like, totally get that. It's great to have a relationship. It's great to build rapport. We talked about the importance of rapport, but there's also business to be done at the end of the day. We also have a fiduciary duty to our clients to put their business in the best place forward. So going forward, I should say. So hopefully that, I know I said a lot there. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, and what a great example. Thank you for sharing that. It really brings it to life when we can share examples like that. So speaking of building rapport and relationships, we did touch on the work that you're doing with Save the Family when we opened up. I'd like to know your point of view on the importance of not only being a professional and having a business and working in that space, but giving back.
Yeah.
Because you always have. And what drives you to do that? And why is it so important?
Yeah. I just think it's so important. Trying to figure out what drives me is really like my why in life, which is really just trying to put my family and my wife and my children, it's the same thing. You could talk about life insurance to a certain extent. Like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, are they taken care of? Like I have to look on hopefully from heaven, if I made the right decisions in life, that they're in a good place moving forward. And so when anyone is driving around, and if you're around a big city like a Houston or a Phoenix, you see homeless everywhere, right? And sometimes the worst part for me is when you see a family that's homeless, because those children, those parents might have made some decisions, and I'm not trying to be judgmental here, but the children certainly had nothing to do with creating that homeless nature. And so that really pulls on my heartstrings. And so what I love about Save the Family is the organization isn't called Save the Parents, it's called Save the Family. So there's usually children involved in that. And so in the last year, actually, because we had a board meeting this week, Save the Family has helped 780 families overcome poverty and homelessness and start to achieve self-sufficiency. So that's getting them into rental programs or rental housing with some down payment assistance, helping them build out their resumes, helping them get vehicles, jobs, financial assistance, you kind of name it. So whatever supportive services they need, because if you look at what Save the Family is doing, as opposed to maybe like the government funding, which is, through the Department of Economic Security, someone can come get their SNAP funding or their welfare checks, and then they basically have free reign on the rest of their day. But with Save the Family, it's a real big, and what I love about it is it's not just like a blank check and we're just going to keep funding and we don't know what these people are doing all day. There's real accountability. And so the case managers on at least a monthly basis, and a lot of times case managers are meeting with the families at least twice a month, are going to the family's home. And quite frankly, checking on the home when they should be at work and things of that nature, because Save the Family still owns the rental property. So they're able to access the home and making sure there's no drug paraphernalia or alcohol. The children are safe, which is obviously protecting the children's of the utmost importance. So I love what they're doing for the community. I love that, unfortunately, there's a lot of organizations out there that are, if you give them $100,000 check or you made a $100,000 donation, sometimes 25 grand of that's actually going to the families. So I love that there's a great split as far as what's really going to the families when it comes to Save the Family, because that's far too uncommon, quite frankly. And yeah, I love what they're doing for the community that I grew up in. So.
Yeah, I love that. So I'd like to tie and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, your sales psychology to these nonprofit organizations and why, or your thoughts on why it's important to look at them as a business, although they're a nonprofit. So how do you bring that sales psychology into a nonprofit organization like Save the Family?
Yeah, so it's not really, there's really no like business opportunity for me there on Save the Family, and that's by no means a priority at all. That's totally me being a connector. Quite frankly, I have our gala coming up in March, so I spend a good amount. I block out some time on my calendar every week to make cold calls, literally fundraising for the gala. And then yesterday, actually through a great contact I had at, we'll give her a little shout out on here if that's okay. But Jane D'Amelio from Valley Toyota Dealers was a great supporter of the Scottsdale Saguaros and still is for the last 10 plus years. Basically giving away a car or a cash check through like a raffle for the Scottsdale Saguaros. I was able to actually connect her yesterday over lunch with the development team at Save the Family. So basically trying to connect dots, basically just trying to take my whole connection pool and trying to reroute them to Save the Family as much as I can. Because I love what the organization's doing, and I want to help it however I can with it, with the time I have. I don't have all the time in the world, but the leftover time I do have in my day, I like to spend, giving back. So
I love that. And for clarity, not about you doing business with them, but how important it is to run a nonprofit like it's a business.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we talked about, in the board meeting the other day, the CEO, Rob and Julian, talking about a lot of the challenges that even those businesses face. Like there's a war in talent, and you're not always getting what you pay for. Same thing in the development space. It's so important to have the right development team, which is led by Rose Meyer and Misha Davis, who are an absolute dream team now. But before that, in 2 years, they had gone through like 3 or 4 chief development officers, and it just wasn't the right fit constantly. And so that position has to be filled with extremely competent people, which they have now, which is so important because if you're not able to fundraise in those roles, you should not be in those roles, quite frankly. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, and oftentimes these organizations are started by people who just have a gift for giving and don't really understand that raising money is part of the business of that nonprofit. And if they don't have the money, they can't serve the community that they want to serve. And I think that's so important. And I know that you bring a lot of talent and connections. You talked about that. And it's so important to have people like that serving inside of these organizations. So thank you for everything that you're doing for that organization and all of your clients. Some great stories today. So as we get to the back end of our conversation, I have one last question for you. And for the business owners who are listening today, sales professionals, or even those community leaders, what's one small, consistent action they can start this week to build stronger relationships and a stronger community around them?
Yeah. So I would say more towards the sales professionals out there that might just be getting started, or might be like Robert McKnight 10 years ago, who was completely lost. Right? and it's that, it starts off with a joke, but then there's going to be a serious point. I promise. So I don't condone any drug use, but the worst drug that a salesperson can take is what I call hopium. So not opium, hopium. So I'm sitting around at my desk. I should be making calls. I should be making connections. I should be at association meetings. But instead, I'm refreshing my LinkedIn 15 times a day, just thinking that a prospect or a huge Fortune 500 company is going to LinkedIn message me and say, Robert, can you please do my insurance? Never going to happen, Trisha. Never going to happen for anyone.
I'm so confused, Robert.
No, I know. It's just never going to happen. I'm sorry. And so my point with that is, don't get high on hopium. Be honest with yourself. No one knows your sales pipeline or your sales funnel better than you. Your bosses there might be smoke and mirrors based off of what you're putting in Salesforce and whatnot. So be honest with yourself. Be honest with where you are in your business. Be honest with what you need to do, and then implement the right discipline to make it happen. It's not salespeople are built because we were not meant for rocket science. It's not that hard to succeed, but it does take discipline to do the right things day in and day out. So
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And I know there are people listening who know me, like, just pick up the phone. You can't wait for it to ring. You got to go.
No, I'm sure it's going to ring, and it's going to be Nordstrom's or Nvidia. They're going to say, yeah, please do my insurance. It's like, I'm still waiting for that call. Still waiting.
Well, and you said some things that I think are really brilliant pieces of advice as well, is get to know them. Where do they love to vacation? Did they go fishing in Cabo? Learn more about that. What are their children's names? Like, so much around just getting to know them is so important. And it's brilliant what you do in your business and even for the community. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been my pleasure to host you.
No, thank you for the time. Hope we can do it again one day. So really,
I would love that. Yeah. How about 2026? Robert comes back and we're going to talk about it. Yeah, I love that. All right, Robert, thank you so much again. And you guys, that's all the time we have for today. If you found value in this conversation that I had with Robert, please share it with a fellow entrepreneur, veteran, or Houston leader ready to grow. And be sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It helps us reach more bold business minds just like yours. And of course, your business, your leadership, and your legacy are built one intentional step at a time. So stay inspired, stay focused, and keep building the business and the life you deserve.